Good day, everyone. Welcome. Over 200 people are with us today. That's fantastic. I'm Steve Miller with the virtual events team at SIETAR UK, and I am thrilled to be your host for this great session that's planned. Before I introduce our presenters, a couple of pieces of information regarding housekeeping. Please use the chat like you're doing now to say hello to everyone. That's great. And Bill and Seiji will be also using the chat throughout the session for some interactive activities. If you have questions, though, for Bill or Seiji, please use the Q&A function. You'll also find that near the chat function. We won't be able to handle any questions that you put into chat because chat just flies by. It's really difficult to grasp what's happening in the chat. So please use Q&A to post questions. And they will be dealing with most of the questions towards the end of the hour. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Bill Reed and Seiji Nakano, both of them based in London with Worldwork. They will say a little bit more about themselves. So without further ado, Bill and Seiji, it is all yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. So let's start.
Seiji, I've just lost my script.
Oh. That's really okay. Yeah. Good. So let's start. So firstly, negotiations can be hard, and working across cultures can be hard as well. So our starting point today is negotiating with unfamiliar cultures can be double hard. So let's introduce ourselves first. Bill?
Okay, yeah, my name is Bill Reed. I spent most of the last 35 years in the field of intercultural management training and consultancy with my own company, East Asia Business, specializing mostly in helping Japanese, South Korean and Chinese companies to work successfully with the West and vice versa, of course. I'm semi-retired, but frankly, I'm not very good at being retired. And as a result, I'm now working part-time as a consultant to Worldwork and enjoying it very much. Over to you, Seiji.
So I am Seiji Nakano. I work as an operational manager and learning engineer at Worldwork. I am originally from Japan and have been spending my life internationally and negotiating across cultures personally and professionally since age of 16. I am also a digital director of SIETAR UK and operational member of SIETAR Southeast Asia. So many of you will know Worldwork as a supplier of psychometrics tools, such as International Profiler, for use in the intercultural field over 2 decades. And we are continuing to design and provide those assessment tools, but increasingly, we are seeking to move into the provision of wider training and coaching solutions. And in fact, we have been working on this subject of negotiating across cultures for some time during our several lockdowns. And we are planning to launch a brand new blended learning product in the near future. So I'll mention about that more at the end of this session. So before we start anything, let's start with a definition.
Okay, so first of all, let's define our terms. What exactly is negotiation? How do you see it? Now, this is a very big crowd to get interactive with, but let's try to do what we can. To start with, let's use the chat box, as Steve mentioned to you. What is negotiation? How would you identify the elements that make up a good definition of negotiation? Okay, so you've got 2 or 3 minutes for you to think about these essential elements, and then we'll talk about it. We'll give you our view, okay?
And in order to feel the awkward silence, I'm going to play some light music for you. Win-win. ground, get something I want, need, and give something for it. Non-violent communication. Exchange win-wins. Art of persuasion. Again. Understand the culture first, then negotiate. Process of coming to an agreement. Give and take, that's interesting. Give, take, compromise.
Very nice, isn't it?
This is great that we're getting so many answers here.
That's right, that's great. Shall we move on now?
Yep.
Okay, guys, that's fantastic. Fantastic variety here. That's a very good definition there, Frank Rudolph. Yeah, that's quite a long one too. It's a very okay. Well, the words are coming through again and again, aren't they? About agreement, about consensus, about win-win, about communication and listening. All of those things, yes, absolutely are key to this process. But I noticed that somebody there put in getting a bigger part of the deal or whatever it was, something like that. So there's something to talk about there. Is it to do with win-win, or is there something else that we should consider? Anyway, that's been very interesting to get those views, and these will be retained and accessible later on, I think, after the event. But let's move on for now. Okay, now we could spend the rest of the time on definitions, but let's not. We have a working definition for this evening, and in fact for our program on negotiating across cultures, and we define it as negotiating is the process of reaching durable agreements on complex issues between two or more parties. Now, I think that there's a fair consensus in this huge group for the elements of this particular definition. So I think that's a good kickoff. Okay, over to you, Seiji.
Right. Now, obviously, we also have to define what the culture is, and I'm very afraid to ask this question to SIETAR groups. But for sake of tonight, we're just going to set a term what the culture is. And obviously, there are a lot of published definitions out there, and really, we can spend all night or all weeks talking about what the culture is. But tonight, let's just agree that tonight we're just going to use two definitions. One straightforward one is the way we do things around here. Or, this is my favorite one, the collective programming of the mind that distinguishes the member of one group or category of people from others. So we're just going to stick to that for the sake of tonight. Right, now let's move on. So returning now to the definition of negotiating and thinking about our own attitude and negotiating, can you ask yourself, what kind of negotiator am I? And I'm going to use Mentimeter for you to do this activity. So I just posted a link on the chat. If you can just click it, you should be able to see a screen like this. So I just posted the link on the chat box, and if you can click that, you should be able to see this box. So you can answer here. Oh, you cannot see the link. Can you still see it? Oh, one moment, please. There you go. How is it now? Can you see the link? Okay, good. Great. Yeah, I was just talking to the panelists. My apologies. So you can copy or click the link and you can jump onto this page, and whatever 3 words that comes into your mind, please write it down. For example, like competitive, compromising, reasonable, collaborative, or aggressive or avoider. And we will be able to see the answers here. So we just, ooh, nice. And it's great to do the word cloud with this many people. So, so while waiting, I'm just going to play music for that too. Collaborative is the biggest, it looks like. Compromising, reasonable, tough, inexperienced, softy. Looks like the collaborative is still big. Oh, it's quite interesting that the compromising is also another biggest one. Reasonable, patient, fair, nice.
You can see tough as well as fair.
Yeah, yeah. Competitive. It looks like the reasonable, collaborative, and compromising seems to be a big part.
Somebody there was saying inexperience, so lack of experience is another issue, perhaps.
Nice.
Very interesting picture.
Oh, thank you, Steve, for sharing that code. Right. Still, wow. It's nice that we're getting a lot of inputs here. Collaborative, compromising, and reasonable. Empathic, that's nice. Nervous, avoider. Patient. Nice.
Okay, I think.
All right.
I think we've got a lot there.
I think, yes, we have 229 people answered this, so that's wonderful. So I think we can agree that there are quite a lot of, but reasonable, collaborative, and compromising seems to be the top 3 words that everyone feels and everyone has a mutual understanding of.
Yes, there's quite there's a little element there of nervousness, inexperience, and things like that, which is also an interesting feature of this. Mm-hmm. But yes, you're right. Collaborative, compromising, reasonable. Seem to be the 3 things that come out of that straight away. We are going to be talking about that later on, about the reasonableness and rationality, perhaps. Okay, it's a very interesting picture. And this is, we think, an important starting point for improving negotiation skills. It comes down to something which all trainers and consultants and coaches are well aware of, the need for self-awareness, knowing your own attitudes and anxieties, emotional responses. And we'll come back to that briefly later on. Moving on, what is normally the tangible outcome of a successful negotiation? It's some kind of document of record, isn't it? Some kind of written agreement. And that is what ends up being a contract. The idea of contracts goes back at least to Plato, Roman law, and probably even much older in China, possibly India, and different parts of the world. So it's been going for a very, very long time. But I'm not sure that people necessarily agree with what a contract is and how it should be used and what the approaches to it exist. I'd like to just relate to you the story of a former colleague of mine. In his negotiation training, he often made a point of asking his participants, who came from all over the world, to tell him what a contract was to them. What does contract mean as far as they're concerned? And his answers were quite interesting. And I'll just give you a flavor of them. Americans, he was working with a group of Americans. He asked them, what do you think a contract is? And there was a tendency to respond that the contract is my Bible. I carry it around with me wherever I go. Later on in Italy, he asked the same question, and the group of Italians said, the contract is a prison. It restricts me, it ties me up, it stops me doing things. Later on, with a group of Dutch managers, the answer came, the contract is an insurance policy in case things go wrong. So very varied in terms of approach and attitude to contract. I'd like to give you one more, rather more outrageous example from my own experience in East Asia. I was told by my friend and colleague, Mr. Kim Guk-tae, a former director of Daewoo, about some fairly extreme South Korean views of contracts as demonstrated by their famous, or rather infamous, chairman, Kim Woo-jung. You may have heard of him. He disappeared into Switzerland with his millions of dollars at the time when his business was collapsing. Anyway, when Daewoo had completed a major contract outlining the terms of a joint venture with a huge US corporation, there was a televised celebration of the signing ceremony. He and the top guy from the American automotive company both signed this fairly thick document and exchanged copies. The American guy triumphantly held up his copy to the audience. Chairman Kim then took his own copy and in front of the television cameras just ripped it up. I do not need such document, he said. Pointing to the director, he said, he is my friend.
So what is a contract? Maybe our own definition of negotiation process is just about acceptable, but attitude and values of the participant might vary significantly. So we could, of course, take into account the extent to which the rule of law is established in different countries and the development of legal systems. But we are simply making the point that the culture, however defined, plays a big part. So negotiating in Brazil is a very different process from making a deal in Kazakhstan. So now let's move on to some other areas in which culture changes things. So what do you think? So please answer in the chat box. What cultural values makes a difference to the process of negotiation? If you can come up with a few examples where you can, that would be wonderful. Power, distance, trust, power. Nice to see the word trust here. Quite a lot of trust. I'll leave another 1 minute here. Honesty, understanding, trust, relationship, respect.
You see a little bit of Mr. Hofstede coming out here.
Yes. It's quite interesting that people are saying trust, because trust also have a lot of different way of building trust, isn't it?
Yep.
High-low context cultures, yes.
Uncertainty avoidance. Bella figura, saving your face.
Collaboration, yes. Relationship or truth. Certainty.
Relationship to time is an interesting one.
That is very nice, yeah. Because there's research on how we see time differently, isn't it? About whether it's a circular or linear.
Yes,
yes. Also, Mr. Trumpeneur's dilemma here as well. Description, achievement, short-term, long-term, of course. Recommendation, context.
Different meanings of success, that's a nice one, I like that. Yeah.
Non-verbal communication, of course, universalism, particularism. This is a wonderful resource here that I would like to save all this chat. Risk adverse, accepting, yes. All right, so I will move on to a bit more. All right. So thank you very much for your input. I know some of you are still typing, so you can continue posting it. But so it's great that we have a few ideas, well, a lot of ideas here, and we have a few ideas on our own, on this matter too.
Yes. Keep them coming. They're great ideas, and as Seiji said, this will be a great resource at the end. So to print out the chat box is going to be quite an interesting result, I think. Well, first of all, some things like who's in the room and where is the power? In some cultures, of course, a good manager is supposed to delegate authority so that to a subordinate in order to get negotiations achieved quickly and in an empowered way. But where the negotiating partner company holds back the final decision maker until all the detailed work has been done, well, then there's a good chance of misunderstanding and irritation. So maybe something to do with what a couple of the panelists talked about, time issues. Well, of course, it's only generates misunderstanding and irritation if you don't know about that. So if you know that's the case, then you can deal with it, of course. I'd like to just tell you a story, again, from my own experience of working with a major Euro-Japanese collaboration in the automotive sector. You'll soon discover that what we're talking about here is Nissan Renault, because we need to talk a little bit about that company later on. The major conflict between the two parties, I spent 9 years working in Japan and in France with the alliance, and I'd like to report on a bit of that. The major conflicts arose early on in the alliance, mostly around decision-making, making decisions. And I'd like to talk you through some of the issues that came from that. This picture shows something of what we've been talking about. In this and many cases, the European, in this case, French tendency was generally to go for quite rapid decision-making, making decisions fairly quickly, and only then go on to work out how to implement the decision. This meant having to persuade others to go along with it, each with their own view. And to be fair, very often people might be saying, well, oh my God, if only he'd asked me first, I could have told him that'll never work. So a lot of talking and discussing and arguing after the decision. And what this often meant was that the implementation of the decision took quite a long time, but the decision was made pretty quickly. Okay. Set against this, the Japanese tendency was to plan and discuss seemingly forever from a Western point of view before reaching group consensus that included the most senior person in the department. Although this took a long time, apparently, the implementation was immediate because everybody knew exactly what to do, when to do it, and exactly how to do it. So overall, therefore, the result was fairly similar, even if arrived at by very different methods. Main problems here were the attitudes and the reactions. So if we were to take a point somewhere in the middle of this picture, the European managers, looking down at the Japanese team, saw that nothing was decided and that progress was infuriatingly slow from their point of view. How dare they for God's sake, make your minds up, might be what some of the messages going across. From the other point of view, the Japanese managers looking upwards here were horrified to see that their French colleagues were going around apparently acting as if everything was decided. How dare they make such decisions without consulting us, was their view. Well, eventually, after long discussion, we managed to persuade the two parties to sit down together and examine their respective attitudes and behaviors. So in short, their cultures. In the end, these parties were able to appreciate the good as well as the difficult aspects of the other's procedure. Where the case was urgent, they decided, in other words, where an opportunity had to be taken quickly or not at all, maybe the European style was best. the Japanese knew perfectly well how their financial sector had suffered during the period of frenzied bank lending in the 1980s, in part due to its own inability to decide quickly. So they were aware about that issue. However, where the decision was very important and absolutely had to be got right first time, like, for example, what platform to use for the next products, the Europeans accepted that over the years, the Japanese had shown that they tended to make good and less risky, uncertainty avoidance there, of course, less risky long-term decisions by virtue of their thoroughness. So both sides learned to collaborate, and from then on started any big discussion with a consideration of urgency and importance before deciding how they were to go about it. Well, as you will have guessed, as I mentioned to you, this was the case of Renault-Nissan alliance. And thanks mostly to Carlos Ghosn, now best known as the Lebanese hermit, that Nissan was saved from bankruptcy over the first 18 months of the alliance. Mr. Ghosn said at the very beginning, Nissan will always be a Japanese company. Renault will always be a French company, but the alliance will have its own culture, worked out and negotiated between themselves. Interestingly, the alliance language was decided to be what I call offshore English. Very, very important. The language of the alliance belonged neither to the Japanese nor to the French. Very important. Seiji.
So many of things we see in intercultural differences are there, like you mentioned in the chat box, like power distance, hierarchies, risk avoidance, collectivism, individualism, and many different things that we have been studying and talking about. And we all agree that the culture plays an important part. So now let's turn to the negotiation process itself. So massive amount of research has been done in this area over decades, and hundreds of books been written on negotiation. For us, the outstanding achievement and continuing regard of community of negotiation trainers and indeed negotiators is the work done in the early 80s by Harvard Project. At the forefront of this were Roger Fisher and William Ury. Their book called Getting to Yes had sold over 2 million copies in 20 different languages. And we would like to show just a quick summary of their idea of principled negotiation.
Okay, so principled negotiation seeks to take an ethical stance and a conflict avoiding approach to methodology. In essence, they were looking to offer a win-win solution where all parties moved to some degree in order to find a solution that was acceptable by all parties. Let's just go into a little bit of detail on the key principles. Number one was separate the people from the problem. So where disagreements arise or where it appears extremely difficult to make progress, we should avoid any temptation to blame the other party. It doesn't help to make it personal. There is a problem, work together to find as yet unexplored possibilities. Blaming the other person is a certain path to failure. Okay, number two is focus on interests, not positions. I think we've all been on those markets where we're trying to buy or sell carpets or something like that. But firing numbers at each other is ultimately defeatist. You know, I want you to pay 10. No, I'll pay 2. No, 8. No, 4, etc. This is an unimaginative method that commonly ends in deadlock and is oversimplistic, of course. What we need to do is to find out why in such a position is important to the other side. So we focus on interests, not positions. Combining these numbers with other agenda items may permit creativity. The price of a product may be crucial to you, but less important to the others. Whereas, for example, delivery times may be crucial for them, but easy for you to provide. You won't know this unless you ask. The third of these principles was look for options for mutual gain. Creativity is one of the most important qualities, I think, of a good negotiator. enlarging the pie, extending the time scale, including some other deal in the mix are all good things to do when deadlock is reached. It may well be that what seems to be important to the other side may well not be true. They may be making similar miscalculations. So get creative is the message from this particular principle. The next one is objective criteria. When one side is making significant claims about particular items, it may be better to seek objective criteria to determine the truth or otherwise of their assertion. Certainly better than a simple, I don't believe you. Also, we should remember both sides have bosses. You will need to justify any agreements to them. So objective criteria are very useful and, of course, calm things down as well. The final one, the final principle here is called develop your BATNA. BATNA stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, and this is what most people call Plan B. This is frankly where I personally failed miserably in my first big negotiating experience with a major publishing company. I simply had no viable BATNA, so I had to take what I was given. It was a very hard lesson. The better your BATNA, the smaller the chance of ending up with a forced, unfavorable agreement. The BATNA is definitely worth developing for exactly that purpose.
Now, you may be thinking, and rightly said by Catherine, that it seems very US oriented to me. It is all positive. It looks all very positive and highly rational, but it comes pretty much from European Enlightenment idea of scientific method and logic and equality. But what about other cultures like south and east of Western Europe or Asia or North America or South America? And you'd be right to think that, obviously. And this is the essence of our subject today. So I would like to make a quick recommendation on this topic. A book called How the World Thinks by Julian Baggini. And in this book, he points out misleading assumption about imagined global uptake of logic and rationality by digging deep into the philosophy of, among others, like India, China, Japan, and Islamic cultures. And not every culture swallows the Enlightenment messages whole. So if you're interested, I have just posted, one moment, I just posted a link to his book. So if you're interested in, you can take a look in the chat box. Now, what all this means is that this whole win-win philosophy does not always apply, or our common sense or values don't always apply. For example, when a very rich multinational company tries to establish a low-cost supply line in a very poor countries, it's not very difficult to understand that the equality of the outcome, unfortunately, the equality of outcome is not top of the poor party's agenda. It might end up being something like win and I don't care. Of course, needless to say, the negotiators in these poor countries lacked nothing in intellect and strategic thinking. Their historical and cultural experience of West might not have been so reasonable.
Yes, well, at this point, it might be a good idea to leave politics and ideology out of this discussion for now, but of course it's something never to be forgotten or avoided if you're negotiating in Saudi Arabia or you're negotiating in China, then of course these things will always be in the background, in fact not always in the background. I saw Neil Payne pointed out some differences with the Saudi approach to all of this, and certainly we need to see the range of different approaches to this if we are going to be good at negotiating with unfamiliar cultures. And we need an approach to improving our abilities to do it. Okay. We see the principled negotiation method as a reasonable foundation from which to nuance the process according to cultural preferences. And we must take on board the idea that ethics and morality are not fixed in stone. They vary across the globe, of course. This brings us to something which is often a concern for people that come on negotiating programs that I've done, and that's what you might call dirty tricks. Wherever we are, and even within our own cultural framework, there are tactics that seek to gain advantage over others through the deployment of various common tricks. So using time delays to keep people waiting, or to try and force them up to a deadline. Environmental trickery, the room is too hot, the room is too cold, or whatever. Good cop, bad cop, that sort of thing. Well, these are things which we need to consider, and to consider our responses to them by reference actually to some of those principles of negotiation, which I think do work very well. But we're not going to go into all of these right now, but we do plan to cover them in the blended learning session that we're working on. Okay, over to Seiji.
Yes, so to summarize, culture shapes and influences the negotiation process. So we need to have some consensus on how we go about it before we can build beneficial agreements. So like all trainers, we have a model. We created a model for this and an acronym because it's very easy to memorize. So let's have a look at this.
Okay, so a framework that we're going to be using is ideal. Ideal, meaning I'm doing business, or ideal, meaning perfectly suited. We all need these acronyms, don't we? So the first one, I, is inner purpose. As with many areas of skill development, oh, sorry, let me just run down the list first of all. Thank you, Seiji. Inner purpose first, D for diagnosis, E for entry point, A for adaptive communication, and L for look for options. And these are the 5 modules that we're talking about in our program that's coming up. But let's just consider the range of them now. So inner purpose, first of all. As with many areas of skill development, we start with self-awareness, know yourself. In this case, awareness of how we interact with people from other cultural backgrounds. Where do we put our energy and what are our drivers? To work on this, we are proposed to use our best known product, the International Profiler, which is a psychometric tool for those that don't know, to see where we tend to place our energy and our emphasis in our intercultural interactions. For efficiency's sake, we plan to use a short version of TIP. But anyway, we start off any program by being clear about where we stand, where we are in ourselves. Diagnosis is the next one. In our view, this is the crucial part of the process. What do we really need to know about our negotiating partner, including knowing the people themselves as individuals, the organization they represent, the culture of their organization, and the cultural preferences typical of their nation. We need to think about what they want and need and how big a deal this is for them. Wherever possible, we need to find out about their expectations for this process. It's certainly been our experience that this is an area where lots of negotiations fail, that not enough emphasis is given to this part of the process. Entry point is the next one. How do we get started in real time? Who should make the first offer, and how should we respond to it? And do we have a ZOPA? ZOPA is a zone of potential agreement. Is there a range of aims and objectives between one party and another, or 3 or 4 parties? Is there a range within which a deal is going to be possible? The next part is adaptive communication. This is, of course, to do with high-level intercultural communication skills. I'm sure lots of people on this webinar are well informed and well skilled in this area, but we need to look at it specific to the negotiating process. what will meetings look like? What's the shape of the meetings that we should be trying to develop? And of course, how to handle different strategies and tactics used by the others, maybe dirty tricks among them. And the last one is look for options, the creative element for when deadlock is reached, enlarging the pie, etc. All of those things which make it possible to resolve deadlock positively. Okay.
So that covers all our framework, and this is just the information for you that here's the shape of our blended learning program, 5-module program involving 4 live online sessions, including subgroup sessions and role-play scenarios and pre-work and study between day and day 2. And we're also offering one-to-one sessions afterwards where participants have specific issues to share. And the first iteration of this program will be run by Bill and myself. And the first event will start on 30th of April with a short pre-session briefing on the platform and some preparation for the first live session. So I hope some of you can make that or be interested. So if you're interested, please visit the worldwork.global/NXC, or you can contact us at info@worldwork.global. And the session will have only maximum of 10 people, so so that everyone will get more opportunities to talk about their own context. Right. So the 1 hour is very short, so thank you very much. Apologies that we rushed a bit, but I hope that you have taken some of the useful information here. So if there are any questions, we'll answer it here too.
I wonder if Steve has got the Q&A things there.
Yeah, so there are a few. Thank you so much, Seiji and Bill, for that fascinating walkthrough of negotiating across cultures. We do have a few questions. So Neil asked, would it be possible to share that word cloud? It was great.
Yes, of course. Should I just give it to you, Steve, so you can?
Okay. Yeah. So, and then Allison asked about sharing chat. So yes, for both of those, the chat and the word cloud, look for the links to them in the YouTube video post. The video itself of the webinar will be up on YouTube probably yet today. It might take a day or two to add the links to these couple of documents though. So within a day or two, you should have everything there.
Right.
Vincent says, I think the Harvard principle, separate the people from the issue, works in the US and a few other areas like Scandinavia and the Netherlands, but not so much in the rest of the world. Indeed, if you say your offer is not good, try more, how can you separate person from issue? Any insights on that?
I think from my point of view, the essence of that particular principle is to say that purely rational discussion may not be the answer to every question, but that it will help you to avoid unnecessary conflict. I think it's a conflict prevention principle that it tries to achieve. But I agree there are some interesting issues there. Of course, you can't not be people, but I think what that one's saying is to avoid unnecessary conflict. It's quite good to keep things on a factual basis. That's my view. Seiji, anything to add?
Yes, the separating people from the issue part is that from my Japanese experience working in Japan and negotiating with Japanese, really sometimes the issue comes after the relationship. So working on the issue and people working on the issue together to solve the issue also creates the further trust and further deeper relationship. And sometimes in the short term, it can look like lose-win situation, that I lose, that you win situation. But the long term, for the Japanese sense, why as a Japanese person, as a negotiator, we tend to listen to people's the client's requests. Although sometimes it might seem slightly unfair, because that doing a favor gives a longer trust about the bigger relationship. So sometimes you do that just for the sake of long-term relationship, and in the long term it can be win-win.
Yeah, there's a very interesting one there about a question there about getting it being a good idea to build a relationship before you do any kind of solid negotiating. I think there's some truth behind that. Just in one particular experience I had, it was interesting to note that an Asian company was trying to form a joint venture with a European company very quickly indeed, and the European company was rather pleased because they thought this was all going our way. In the end, they discovered that the reason that this company wanted to take rights to sell and develop a particular product was in order to keep them out of the Asian market, which was the exact opposite of what they wanted. So yeah, it's a complex matter, but certainly interesting. Yeah.
It's interesting that one of the person, and also in the chat as well, asked about the gender.
Mm-hmm.
The negotiation, probably the effect of different genders and negotiations. It is also quite big topic to talk about, isn't it? That could also negotiation internally about the potentially salary, or potentially about the positions or promotions, isn't it?
Helen, I like your point about negotiating in Italy, where the coffee breaks are so crucial. I remember when I took over a company in Milan as general manager for a few years, and one of the things I noticed was that when the company was in crisis, I rushed over to Milan to talk to the management team from London, and when I got there, I was ready to go and wanting to get down to business straight away. And the first thing they said to me was, "Let's go to the corner shop and have a coffee." That blew my mind at the time. I now have a greater affinity for that sort of thing, but I must admit, there's quite a few cultural shocks to be had in that area. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other major? Maybe
John.
Martin says maybe we need a female on our team. I think we always need a female on our team, don't we?
Yes.
John asks something here. The ideal framework appears to be rational. What about the emotion? I think emotions play a very important role in intercultural interactions and negotiation.
Yeah. Well, I think that comes in very much to the first of the modules there, the inner purpose, the self-awareness. I think we need to, or rather our approach is to allow room and space for people to think seriously and act seriously about their own issues, how they really, really deeply feel about these things, and to accept that some cultures are definitely much more emotional than others. And if I come from a very unemotional culture and I'm going to go and deal with a very emotional culture, then I definitely need some of that emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence that there are many, many books about. Yeah. But I think it's certainly something that we need to take into account, which is why it comes first on that list, I think.
Richard,
is Nikki Webster there has asked a difficult question about bi or tricultural, and a switch depending on what they want or know can be obtained. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that's the advanced class, isn't it? I think there are rather few people that are up for that. And but very interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more about playing a card game, isn't it? That you need to know what kind of styles that you can play around, and having a range of styles that you can influence others. Yes. And knowing that what kind of styles you don't have as well is also important. So you can really you can strategically think about your approach before your negotiation itself.
Yeah, I don't know if people agree with me, but I found that if I go on my own to a multicultural meeting of some kind, I leave behind a certain amount of Englishness, and definitely open to signals coming from different parts of the room. If there are 3 Brits, of course, in that room, then things change. And I think that's a crucial issue, is what is the balance. I think when many people from different cultures are there, but are there in small numbers, each represented by 1 or 2 people, then I think that a lot of cultural issues fall into the background there. People are searching for some kind of commonality, some common approach, I think. That's been my experience.
But then again, if you rely on the cultural differences, I have seen the quite strange situation that the Japanese person trying to handshake and another person from America is bowing. So, you know, you need to see that what's going on in that room to understand to understand and analyze what's there in real, and adjust and recalibrate your strategy.
Yes, communication.
Oh, communication, yes.
From Katarzyna. Yeah, that's definitely an issue, and it's certainly something that I used to great benefit when I was living and working in Tokyo. Yeah. I found it to be a very amenable way of getting to know and getting to work effectively with my clients and suppliers and things like that. Yeah. Obviously, one has to be aware that too much of that might be a bad thing, but it's definitely good. Okay. Yeah.
There are several questions yet in Q&A.
Yeah.
Richard asks, how will you integrate the tip tool?
Well, I'll leave that one to Seiji. I think he knows the tip better than me.
So, as Bill mentioned in the inner purpose part, to know yourself, we will use the international profiler to sort of give the direction, show that what kind of attitude and what kind of tendency you have when it comes to the unfamiliar cultures. So we draw a map of your behaviors first, so that and also we draw a behavior, the tendency that what you normally don't do, so you can move on to the different tactics later on. And in the adaptive communication, in the international profiler, there are some dimensions about influencing areas that, you know, building rapport, the range of style, knowing where where the decision makers are. So we will compare that and thinking that, so what sort of part that you need, the dimensions that you need to put more attention on when it comes to the negotiating, when it comes to that specific stage.
Okay, I noticed there's a couple of questions about gender issues, and one particular one about, is it okay in Japan for informal meetings in bars and things like that? Again, Seiji should answer this one specifically, but in my own experience, the female managers in our company seem to have very little problem in that respect, and definitely they were very good at developing strong relationships with some of our clients. That's my experience.
Just to answering that Charlotte's one, the nominication back in time when I was working in Japan, nominication was one of the a bit of restriction, because sometimes the female managers want to go home, and this nominication sort of forces you to go out after the meetings and after working hours. So around that time, we were creating a bit more informal coffee breaks in the evening to replicate that nominication area. But there are different tactics that can be done. And also there are a lot of articles in Japan, in Japanese, that's been talking about the female leadership, and also how can you make the Japanese working environment to not to exclude the different genders or different nationality, or not to exclude the other people who have been sort of excluded in that time.
Nikki Webster asks about literature on female leaders in Japan. Actually, I do strongly recommend that you get the Japan Times. The Japan Times every day or once a week or something. There's nearly always something about that subject right now. So I would definitely recommend the that particular newspaper.
There's a lot of interest in Japanese cultures, but how are we doing on time?
I was just going to say, Bill and Seiji, we're at the top of the hour. So I'm going to take a moment to thank everyone for spending the hour with us, especially Bill and Seiji for your contribution. There will be a quick feedback poll when you leave the webinar. Please, we'd like to hear what you thought of it. And also let you know there are lots of events coming up in the future. I'm going to paste a link to the calendar on the SIETAR Europa website. So all the SIETAR Europa events are there. Also a lot of national SIETAR events. So check it out. There's a lot more learning there ahead of you. Again, thank you very much. Bill, Seiji, do you have a couple more minutes to continue answering some questions, or are we good to go?
I don't mind either way.
Yeah, sure, I can stay a little
There's
longer.
a cluster of questions on a particular subject, and it'd be worth us going on for 5 more minutes or so.
Okay, I'm happy to stay around for 5 more minutes. So, folks, if you need to go, please feel free to go. Otherwise, hang on for a few more minutes. Again, thank you for being with us, and see you sometime soon.
Great, goodbye. Great talking.
Bye.
All right. Back to the questions.
Yeah. We can't see the Q&A thing, can we? Unless you can, Seiji, can you?
I can, and the link somehow doesn't. One moment, please.
Okay, so I've got them here. What Allison asked, what do you think about the role of the mediator or a neutral third party in negotiation, and the role of language?
This is a question that you want us to answer in 5 minutes. Alison, the mediator.
This is your encore.
The mediator question is quite an interesting one. I think that to some degree, the appearance or the existence of a mediator tends to imply that things have not gone that well in the past, and that maybe there is some need for a non-partisan person, and so I would be quite wary of that kind of approach. It does happen, of course, where there are existing differences in opinion or differences in approach. I suppose that's the case. The role of language in negotiation, is both interesting and enormous. So it's a very big question to go into, but that's what the A is for, adaptive communicating in our framework there. That's what that's all about, really. It's about choosing, for example, what type of questions to ask at what stage of the negotiation and things like that. So linguistic considerations are significant at that in the real-time process of negotiating.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.